Hi everyone, I'm Abby. Welcome to my channel and welcome to this new video. Today I'm going to talk about two topics, the past perfect and the past perfect continuous or progressive with many examples. Now let's start. Past perfect and past perfect continuous. Let's start with the past perfect. Functions. First, when the action had occurred before another action in the past. This is the past of the past, a previous action to the simple past. In the past perfect, we always have two actions, but we need to find the first action. For example, she had read the book before the movie came out. The first action is she had read the book. And after this, the second action is the movie came out. She is the subject. Had the auxiliary verb. Read is the main verb in past participle. And the complements. Next example, they had cleaned the house before the guests arrived. The first action is they had cleaned the house, and after this, the guests arrived. They is the subject, had the auxiliary verb, cleaned the main verb in past participle, and the house before the guests arrived is the complement. Next example, I had bought the dress before it sold out. The first action is I had bought the dress, and after this, it sold out. The subject is I, the auxiliary verb had, and the main verb in past participle both. The complement, the dress before it sold out. In these examples, the first action is in the past perfect, and the action that follows is in the past simple. Second, when an action had a duration of time before another action in the past. This function gives us the idea of the duration of time. For example, he had worked all the weekend on his project before the presentation. Here we can say that he presented his project, but before presenting it, he had worked all the weekend on his project. He is the subject, had is the auxiliary verb, and the main verb in past participle, worked, and the complements. Next example, we had spoken a long time with the manager before organizing the party. We organized the party, but before it, we had spoken a long time with the manager. We is the subject, had the auxiliary verb, and spoken the main verb in past participle, and then the complements. Next example, you had completed the assignment 5 minutes before the deadline. We can say that the deadline expired, but you had completed the assignment 5 minutes before this. In these examples, all the weekend, a long time, and 5 minutes are complements of time, and this help us to recognize the duration of time of the action. The structure. First, we have the subject plus the auxiliary verb had. We can use the auxiliary verb had with all subjects. I had, you had, he had, she had, it had, we had, they had. plus the main verb in past participle. Here we have examples with the structure. In the positive form, they had celebrated the birthday before the actual date. We have the subject they, the auxiliary verb had, the main verb in past participle celebrated, and the complements. In a negative form, we had not explored the city before the tour started. We have the subject and the auxiliary verb in negative form, had not explored the main verb in past participle, and the city before the tour started, the complement. Question form. Had you watched the movie before the spoilers were revealed? We have first the auxiliary verb had, the subject you, the main verb in past participle watched, the complement, and the question mark. More examples. In the positive form, the team had won the game before the tournament. The subject, the team, the auxiliary verb had, the main verb in past participle won, and the complement. In the negative form, he had not booked the hotel before the holidays. The subject, he, the auxiliary verb in negative form had not, the main verb in past participle booked, and the complement, the hotel before the holidays. And the question form. Had she seen the sunrise before? We have the auxiliary verb had, the subject she, and the main verb in past participle. Then the complement and the question mark. Let's see more examples. She didn't go to college because she hadn't finished her homework. Next example, he kept the letters because they had been the only memory of his mother. Next example, I had just finished reading the first chapter when the library announced that it was closing time. Next example, they had just washed the floor when the dog ran in with muddy paws. Remember that the first action is in past perfect and the second action is in simple past. Let's continue with the past perfect continuous. Functions. First, when we want to show that something started in the past and it lasts until another time in the past. This function gives us the idea of the duration of time in progress in the past. For example, she had been studying for 6 hours before she took a break. She took a break, but before this, she had been studying for 6 hours. She is the subject, the auxiliary verbs had been, the main verb with the ing termination studying, and the complement. Next example, they had been playing guitar all morning before their fingers started to hurt. Their fingers started to hurt, but before this, they had been playing guitar all morning. They is the subject, had been the auxiliary verbs, and playing the main verb with the ing termination, and the complement. Next example, I had been sleeping for only 2 hours before the alarm went off. The alarm went off, but before this, I had been sleeping for only 2 hours. The subject, I, the auxiliary verbs, had been, and the main verb with the ing termination, sleeping. Second, when we want to show cause and effect, or cause and consequence. For example, the athlete had been training for months because the competition was approaching. The competition was approaching. This is the cause. And the consequence, the athlete had been training for months. The subject, the athlete. The auxiliary verbs had been. The main verb with the ing termination, train. Next example, we had been talking for hours because the teacher didn't arrive. The teacher didn't arrive. This is the reason why we had been talking for hours. Next example, you have been saving money for years because you wanted to buy an apartment. You wanted to buy an apartment. This is the reason why you had been saving money for years. The subject, you, the auxiliary verbs had been, and the main verb with the ing termination, saving, and the complements. First, we have the subject plus the auxiliary verbs, had plus been. Remember that we can use had been, the auxiliary verbs, with all subjects, plus the main verb with the ing termination. Examples, in the positive form, they had been renovating the house for months before they moved in. The subject, they, the auxiliary verbs, had been, the main verb with the ing termination, renovating, and the complement. Next example, in the negative form. We had not been working on the puzzle before she gave up. The subject, we, the auxiliary verb in the negative form, had not, the second auxiliary verb, been, and the main verb with the ing termination, working, and the complement. Next example, in the question form. Had you been practicing basketball before injuring your ankle? First, the auxiliary verb had plus the subject you plus the second auxiliary verb been and the main verb with the ing termination practicing, the complement, and the question mark. More examples. In the positive form, he had been writing music for months before he recorded an album. The subject, he, the auxiliary verbs had been, the main verb with the ing termination, writing, and the complement. Next example, in the negative form, I still hadn't been sleeping before you called me. I is the subject, plus the adverb still, the auxiliary verb in the negative form, hadn't, the second auxiliary verb, been, and the main verb with the ing termination, sleeping, and the complement. Next example, in a question form, had she been looking for her case before it started to rain? The auxiliary verb, had, the subject, she, the second auxiliary verb, been, the main verb with the ing termination, the complement, and the question mark. And here we have more examples. She had been practicing all day until the power went out. Next example, they had been playing in the yard until their parents arrived. Next example, he had been listening to his favorite song when the DJ changed the track. Next example, I had been thinking about all the work I had when my friends called me to go to a party.
I had survived my first three-way calling attack. And with Regina's blessing, I started talking to Aaron. I had never felt this feeling before. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. My stomach felt like it was going to fall out my butt. Mildly horrified when Aaron didn't immediately ask me to be his girlfriend. I mean, I know he was sad, but how much time did he need? Regina had moved on. In January, Regina had put a spring fling dress on hold at a store called 135. But being plastic, she needed our advice before she could actually buy it.
Can someone zip me up?
Jackpot. Gretchen's secret had put the plan back in motion. After Christmas break, we
said it was an old joke, and it was never funny to begin with. I told him people had been calling me Blackfish for so long, they don't remember my real name.
Under and behind and inside everything this man took for granted, something horrible had been growing.
Look.
To give away $622,000 of my money to a man who had been sleeping with my wife.
Thanks for watching the video. See you the next time with more of English grammar. Bye bye.